Welcome to Sahabhāva. I hope everyone's doing well and keeping safe at home. It's lovely to have you all here again. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that although we are gathering in different places around the globe through a virtual environment, our organizations, ICMSV and Aṣṭa Alliance, carry out our work on the traditional, unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Samayamu, Katsi, Quikwetlam, Kwantlen, Kaikait, and Tsawwassen First Nations. I'd like to thank Aṣṭa Alliance for being ICMSV's curating partner for this project, as well as the generous support from the Center for India and South Asia Research at UBC, and our sister organizations in the States, the Society for Indian Music and Arts, and Nritya PSU. I'd also like to mention before we begin that the Sahabhāva Festival has been featured in an article in a magazine in India called First Post. It's a great honor for us to be featured at a global scale like that and mentioned with a lot of other initiatives that are happening globally. You can find this article and find more details about what was written on ICMSV's and Aṣṭa's Facebook pages. It has been shared out. And do also check out the other initiatives mentioned in the article that are happening across Facebook and YouTube and other mediums, because it's great to support as many initiatives as we can during this time. Both ICMSV and Aṣṭa Alliance are local arts-oriented organizations, and we were both incorporated as not-for-profits in 2017. With ICMSV's primary mandate being music and Aṣṭa's being dance, we've had a long-standing relationship and have had the pleasure of doing a number of collaborative projects together. Our hope with this project is to bring people together through artistic harmony in a time when there's a lot of uncertainty, anxiety, and isolation. The music and dance forms we represent in our organizations have the capacity to not only build community, but they also help us look into ourselves to find solace, stability, and inspiration. We also want to be able to give back to a community of artists who can help us cultivate this within ourselves and support them during a time which is financially unstable for the music and dance community at large. I'm very excited today to welcome a personal school friend of mine, Morgan Khan. She's an undergraduate student at the University of British Columbia. And this whole lecture, I would say, actually kind of started off me thinking about organizing Sahabhāva. So Morgan and I went for a very socially distant, friendly walk at the beginning of isolation. And we just started talking about various topics pertaining to Indian classical music. And one of the topics that came up was Amir Khusrau, which Morgan mentioned. She's done a lot of, her own personal research on, as a personal interest. So then that kind of just sparked an idea in my mind that, we should do a lecture on Amir Khusrau because, there's a lot of information out there about him, some of it debatable, some of it, a little bit more substantial factually. And I thought that it would be really good to explore that as a topic. And then, with isolation going forward, I was like, okay, well, we'll need to do that lecture online. And then that led to me thinking, okay, let's just do a whole big festival online. And one of ICMSV's mandates is to focus on education and awareness. And this is something we're really trying to cultivate, especially the past year. Bringing in more lectures, bringing a diversity of different events, not only performances, so we can actually refine what we know about these art forms and move forward together as an audience here, especially in Vancouver. So I'm very excited for what Morgan has prepared for us today. And before we move on and before I hand things off to her, just a few remarks about today's setup. So again, you won't be able to turn on your video nor your audio, but please type in whatever questions you have in the Q&A tab. I will be relaying these questions to Morgan at the end of her presentation. And whatever appreciation and other remarks that you have, please send in the chat tab. Her lecture is going to last around 45 minutes, and it'll be followed by a question and answer period. And again, for any troubleshooting you have in terms of audio or video quality, please privately message either myself, Saili, or Griha. And I'd now like to welcome Morgan, our eighth presenter for Sahabhāva. Handing things off to you, Morgan.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? I'm guessing, yes. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so everybody can see what it is that I'm specifically talking about. So just give me one moment while I bring it up. All right, so it should be up and working now. So hello, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Akhil, and thank you for having me speaking here at such an amazing event. And I hope that everybody's had an opportunity to turn into several of the other events that have preceded it. I'm really happy to see that just arts and culture is able to still shine light into our lives during such a difficult and dark time. So thank you for starting this initiative. Now, without further ado, I'm going to launch into my presentation on Amir Khusrau. I would like to say that my research is a work in progress, and much like Dr. Mohammed Nritya, who's very well known in his study of Amir Khusrau's life, I hope to make it a bit of a lifelong journey of discovery. I'm not a musicologist, nor am I an ethnomusicologist. I am a historian with a focus on literature. And so my discipline is not on Hazrat Amir's musical contributions to the world, but rather, again, his poetry and the history of the period in which he lived. That being said, as this picture here betrays beautifully, music was a very large part of his life, and in many ways it's untangleable from other aspects of it. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background. I'm working off the assumption that people know about as much as I did when I started my journey. So Amir Khusrau was born in the small town of Patiali near Delhi in the year 1253. His father, Amir Saifuddin Mahmud, had fled the war-torn region of Balkh in Transoxiana some years earlier, making for the relative safety of the northern Indian subcontinent. Once there, he was bought as a slave soldier and quickly rose in rank and prestige, becoming an army commander and receiving a fief near Patiali from the Sultan Shamsuddin al-Tutmish. So eventually he married into a Muslim Rajput family that held ties with the imperial court at Delhi. And the union saw the birth of 3 sons and possibly daughters, though the record often omits the mention of female offspring, which is the case in this instance. Khusrau's parents were very, very dear to him, and it was the intercultural composition of his household which would later inspire his unique style of poetry, which bridged the 2 sides of his cultural heritage between sort of Transoxiana and the northern Indian subcontinent. Now, education was a dominant presence in Khusrau's early life. His father was illiterate himself, but he nevertheless, according to Khusrau's writings, was deeply invested in the education of his 3 sons. So being of a good income, he was able to engage private tutors for them, in addition to sending them to a local maktab, where they could gain knowledge of the Quran and theology, reading and writing in Persian, some Arabic, logic and grammar, as well as calligraphy and poetry. But despite such rich academic offerings, Khusrau proved to be a bit of a capricious scholar who self-admittedly was more preoccupied with composing what he quotes as verses about the silken down on fair faces. He was more interested in doing that than improving, say, his calligraphy skills or his fine-tuning of Arabic grammar. So soon, his instructors began to actively encourage what they saw as a natural and profound ability for poetic expression. And they began bringing him to various literary gatherings at various noble houses in the area where he grew up. There he would consistently impress those in attendance with his remarkable and ever-improving gift with words. Now, when Khusrau was 8 years old, his father died in battle, And this event affected Khusrau very, very deeply. He wrote some very moving poetry in honor of his father upon his loss. And at that time, when he was 8 years old, he moved into the home of his grandfather, Imad al-Mulk, who lived in Delhi. Now, Imad al-Mulk had served as a minister of war for 30-odd years and was extremely wealthy and lived accordingly. Khusrau thus embarked on a life that was highly luxurious, and he passed his youth in a society of great men, and said that he was surrounded by the discourses of scholars and artistic recitals of poets and the melodious songs of musicians. Despite the sumptuousness of this new life, Khusrau did not abandon his pursuit of knowledge. He could have given in to all the temptations that were surrounding him, but just like his father, he did value learning, capricious though he may have been. He did seek his education in a remarkably unconventional fashion, though. So there is no record, Muhammad Mirza states, of his having attended what he calls the colleges of the period, nor is there any proof of his being privately tutored during this period of his life. It is evident that he had a solid understanding of astronomy and theology, jurisprudence. Mirza says that the record shows that he must have gained his education quite haphazardly through the frequent association of with scholars. Oh, there's a note. I guess I just ignore that. So in regard to his poetic education, however, he admits that he, quote, didn't know the silly rules of prosody or the various meters, nor the numerous changes that the rhyme undergoes. He didn't seek the guidance of a master poet, as was most commonly done at the time, opting instead to study the poetry of popular Persian masters of his day and to try and emulate them in his own work. So these styles were not necessarily limited to the Persian masters, just as he had adopted numerous languages, as we'll later see through his interaction with rich Hindus and Afghans and Turks through his travels later in his life. Khusrau's poetic self-education would have likewise been complemented and influenced by the Indic literary traditions and practices that he was surrounded by. So, being thus academically equipped, Khusrau began his poetic career. While he was a very natural courtier, he was very likable, he was very energetic. Sorry about that. He was too young to be formally admitted into the royal court at Delhi, and as such, his first professional position wasn't obtained until 1272, when he joined the household of the Sultan's nephew, a man by the name of Malik Chaju Alauddin Kishli Khan. And while the position was comfortable and rewarding, Chaju proved to be a very jealous patron, and the position was remarkably short-lived. So the story goes that in 1274, the Sultan's youngest son, Baghra Khan, was at a sort of informal, lighthearted gathering, and he was very impressed by Khusrau's talent and started to heap praise and mountains of gold upon this young poet. And of course, Khusrau was pleased and reacted accordingly. But unfortunately for him, Chaju allegedly became very incensed and he couldn't be consoled. So this is all in Khusrau's own writing. So fearing this sort of like jealous backlash that he was receiving, Khusrau fled this household and sought the patronage of Baghra Khan in the city of Samna, which is just up there. So his time with the Sultan's youngest son would prove likewise brief. He didn't have very much luck in the beginning of his career with having long periods of patronage, as we'll see. So soon after he arrived in Samna, Khan was called to march on the cities of Lakhnati and Hajinagar in order to put down an insurrection that had erupted there. Now, following a really hard-won victory, Khan was rewarded with the the governorship of both places. But not wishing to lose what he referred to Khusrau as his boon companion, he didn't want to lose him, he attempted to convince Khusrau at that time to remain there in Bengal with him. Khusrau, however, had other ideas, and he is quoted to have said he did not wish to live in the marsh-ridden province so far from his relatives and his friends, and so he declined the young prince's invitation. So in 1281, Khusrau again found himself in need of a new patron, and shortly after leaving Lucknow, he entered the service of the Sultan's eldest son. So moving up in the world, he came under the patronage of Prince Muhammad Khan. So having come to Delhi to celebrate his father's victory and to pay him homage, this eldest prince took the opportunity to hear Khusrau speak, and he was really impressed by his talent and promptly extended an invitation for Khusrau to join his court in the city of Multan. Khusrau gladly accepted and was to remain there until the prince's untimely death in 1284 at the hands of the invading Mongols. So again, Khusrau not having a lot of luck with long runs of patronage. But in this case, Khusrau was really impacted by Muhammad Khan's passing, and in the period of political instability that followed this prince's death, Khusrau retired back down to Patiala. He didn't go back to Delhi. He went back to his home, where he spent a great deal of time with his mother and his wife and children. And then after that period of sort of respite and grieving, he entered the employ of Malik Amir Ali Sarjandar, and attempted to void the attention of a new sultan named Kaikabad, who had quite the reputation as sort of the partier and was very much underneath the sway of somebody who didn't receive a lot of positive praise from Khusrau, which was his minister, Malik Nazamuddin. So whilst he was in Sarjandar's service, Khusrau traveled to and resided in Awadh, and he would stay there until 1289. Now, when he returned to Delhi, Sultan Qaitbad wasted absolutely no time in bringing Khusrau into his household. Khusrau had a big name by this point, and he was definitely very sought after. So, sorry, he was very, sorry, just one second. Okay, I just have to turn off my speaker, I'm so sorry. So, he was assigned the rank of poet laureate at this time, and he served in that station until the Sultan's death the following year. So just 1 year he served underneath this particular Sultan. And then in 1291, after another period of political turmoil, Khusrau entered the service of the next Sultan, which was Jalaluddin Khalji. And from that point until his death, this was the long stretch. This was his lucky stretch of patronage, because until his death, Khusrau's death in 1325, he remained continuously connected to that particular court, the chief poet of the imperial court. And this, just sort of moving back to this is the a commemoration of that, of him being at Khalji's court. Sorry. Okay, so by the time of his death, Khusrau had generated a remarkable corpus of works that bridged languages and literary traditions, cultural norms and genres, and he left 5 divans, a khamsa, 5 historical compositions, numerous lyrical poems, and 3 lengthy prose pieces he penned. He penned qasidas, rubais, mathnavis, and ghazals. And he collected and organized most of his work during his own lifetime, and ensured that the majority were accompanied by a preface or an introduction or explanatory notes. And this will come in handy later when we look at his musical contributions, as they are heavily referred to by a lot of academics. They are a very rich source of information. So what the result was is that we have like a rich repository of information. And also it reveals that Khusrau was just as likely to sort of produce a flowing Persian ghazal in honor of the beloved as he was to create a clever riddle in Hindavi. And these examples that are up on your screen right now show this. Like on the left-hand side, we see Alexander visiting the sage Plato. So it's a bit of a history piece that is sort of out with, well, Alexander did make it into the northern Indian subcontinent, but with Plato, it's out with the Indian subcontinent. In the middle, it's a more sort of speaking to a more religious topic. And then on the right-hand side, we see a very Persian, a lot of Persian masters wrote about the subject of Layla Majnun. So that's more in line with that. So this disinclination to be bound to one language or one genre or one theme, combined with his intense love for both his paternal and maternal heritages, has resulted in Khusrau becoming a bridge between the Persian and Indic worlds. In his poetry, which we'll visit in a moment, blended languages, culture, and potentially even musical traditions. And this contributed immeasurably to the creation of a creative fusion that would evolve into an Indo-Persian mode of expression. So starting here, one way that we can see this bridge between Persian and Indic worlds is through Khusrau's use of language. While most of his compositions are in Persian, most of the things that we have preserved are in Persian. He also produced a substantial tomb of work in Hindavi, and they are often very clever, very famous riddles. These are particular favorites amongst my husband's family, the exchange of his clever riddles. While most are exclusively in one language or the other, there are a number that are macronic. Khusrau's creative and playful wordsmithing in these instances, in these macronic ones, bridge together and blend the linguistic worlds of Persian and Hindavi. The Hindu lass is a striking example of such linguistic melding, and I'll just take an opportunity to read it here. So I went to enjoy a spectacle on the banks of a river and saw a Hindu woman there. I said to her, "Oh, sweetheart, what is the price of your hair?" And she cried, "A pearl for every strand." Khusrau has seemingly created a quatrain that is exclusively in Persian, so it was written in Persian when you read it. And while beautiful, it's not particularly out of the ordinary or remarkable. What makes it unique is that if a person who understood Hindavi were to encounter the piece, a very different meaning would erupt as that last line was imparted, either read or recited. So from Persian, as we have read, the final line is, "She cried a pearl for every strand." And the same words in Hindavi equate to "get lost, you wretch." So it's not even a mere case of like a different language being used. It's also equating a very different personality to the woman who is being discussed. So Khusrau has taken two languages and woven them expertly together, but he also is sort of betraying this tendency he had to invert social norms. So in the subcontinent during the 13th century, in poetic works, Hindustanis were frequently portrayed as being dark or undesirable, especially when contrasted against Persian aesthetics, which were promoted and celebrating. Again, as I had quoted at the beginning, they were lauded as having fair down on fair faces. And here, Khusrau challenges that norm by promoting a Hindu woman rather than a Persian one to those standards. Oh no, I've lost my ability to move my screen. There we go. Khusrau didn't just reserve the bridging of language for playful verses like that. There are quite a number of those quatrains, but in this poem, "Don't Be Heedless of My Sorry State," he again intertwines the two languages by staggering Persian and Hindavi couplets, starting first with Persian and following on with Hindavi. And from this braid, two voices emerge, which create two poems, one Persian and one in Hindavi, that can, according to Dr. Sunil Sharma, be read independently of each other. So I'm just going to, because there's two voices, I'm going to invite Akhil to unmute himself and read the Persian part, which is not in italics. Are you there, Akhil?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Don't be heedless. Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, I'm not sure if it is working because I can't actually...
Here
you are. There we go. There you are. Yes.
Okay, I'm here. Cool. Okay, there we go. Don't be heedless of my sorry state.
He rolls his eyes and he makes excuses.
For I cannot bear this separation.
Why won't he take me in his arms?
Nights of separation are as long as tresses, and the days of union as short as life.
Girl, if I don't see my lover, how will I get through the dark night?
In a flash, two enchanting eyes seduced my heart and robbed me of my peace of mind.
Who cares for me enough to take my message to my love?
Blazing like a candle, flitting like a mote of dust, continually weeping in love for that beauty.
Sleepless eyes, restless limbs, he doesn't come, he doesn't send word.
In hopes for the day of union with my trickster love, Khusrau.
I will keep myself prepared and ready to go to his abode. Thank you, Akil. So it's here that a bridging of literary traditions becomes evident. So according to the translator, Dr. Sunil Sharma, he argues that the Persian portion of the text, which is again shown in non-italic font, is reflective of a classical Persian literary trope of a lover longing for the unattainable beloved. Now that can be either a physical beloved or it can be the divine. And in a lot of Persian poetry, it's very difficult to actually tell. So he also then argues that the italic version here, the Hindi, meanwhile takes the voice of the Virhini, or a woman of Indic literary tradition who is often depicted as forlorn, in search of an absent or lost lover. Now, when combined, the piece takes on the characteristics of two lovers, both longing for the other but unable to unite. And the poem concludes with the hope that a union will take place on the day of judgment, when everything is equalized and artificial human barriers, such as language and geographical divides, are dispersed of. It should be noted now, however, that Sharma's translation is by no means the most common. So the poem is generally translated in a single voice, which omits the gender references that you saw in the Sharma translation. So do not overlook my misery by averting your eyes and making up stories. My patience has overbrimmed, O sweetheart, and why do you not take me to your bosom? Long like curls in the night of separation, short like life on the day of our union, if I don't see my beloved, how will I pass these dark nights? Suddenly, using 1,000 tricks, the enchanting eyes robbed me of my tranquil mind, and who would care to go and report this matter to my darling? I became from the love of that moonlight beauty like a burning candle, like an aimless droplet, sleepless nights, restless body, you neither come nor send messages. I swear by the moonlight beauty who tricked Khusrau that unto that day we meet again, I shall keep my heart white pure until I find my lover's garden. So this format complicates Sharma's theory, and I would just like to take a moment at this point to sort of appreciate the difficult work translators have, as their decisions, which range from sort of word choice to structure, have a huge impact on how a poem is interpreted by a non-Persian reader. And this is very clear here, as through this translation, the poem can now be read in a single voice by a single speaker, Khusrau, longing for the unattainable beloved and expressing his torturous state through this duality of the two languages and cultures that he embodied and bridged throughout his life. Excuse me. So moving swiftly on from poetic bridges, we enter into the realm of hot debate. How much or how little did Amir Khusrau contribute to the Indo-Persian soundscape? Now, there's really no consensus in this area. There's a lot of back and forth, but academics and lay people alike seem to fall into three groups. One is the belief that Khusrau is responsible for absolutely nothing that is claimed, that it's all myth and fable, and in fact, everything can be traced to either long before him or much after his death. And then there's another group which sort of credits him with everything. It gives him the benefit of the doubt for everything, you know, like, oh, it's possible that he could have been responsible for all the stories that are attributed to him. And then there are those who sort of take a more middle ground and they're like, you know, it's probably not likely that he was responsible for everything that people say he is, but it's pretty likely based on what we can find in the historical record that he is responsible for some of these things. So keeping this in mind, I have attempted to represent an array of views, and being new to the area of soundscapes, I've abstained from falling into one extreme camp or the other. So I suppose that is to say that I've given some weight to the latter point, and that it's likely that he is responsible for some of the developments of an Indo-Persian soundscape, either directly or indirectly. My computer there we go. So Khusrau was both an accomplished musician as well as a poet. His piece on music and poetry provides insight into how he bridged music and poetry as well as Indic and Persian soundscapes. It's a bit of a long poem, but okay. So once a minstrel said to Khusrau, "O storehouse of verse, which is nobler, the science of music or the art of poetry? Music is a science that cannot be precisely noted, but poetry is an art that can be put on pen and paper." Khusrau answered, "I am an expert in both fields, so it is proper that I be the judge in this matter. I composed 3 books of poetry that, in fact, are 3 books of music. I will describe the difference truly for one who is a judge of such things. Imagine poetry to be a complete science. It needs no notes, nor a minstrel's voice. A poem sung low or high makes no difference to its meaning or to its words. But if a minstrel utters random words as song, without lyrics they have no sense or meaning. Take the flute player, who has his own voice and the flute, but he still needs someone else for the lyrics. Thus, both one with a voice and the listener are in need of a master's words. Music thus requires both voice and melody. Poetry needs only a connoisseur of words. Poetry is the bride and song her ornaments. But is there any harm if a beautiful bride has none? One who knows this I consider to be human, and if not, he should ask me, but if he doesn't, he is an ass." So the minstrel first complains that there is no existent way to notate musical compositions. Khusrau responds by clearly stating that he is an expert in both poetry and music, and that were it possible, he would have been able to commit this musical and poetic creation to paper. So many academics use this particular poem and this specific exchange as proof that Khusrau bridged musical and poetic disciplines. And honestly, given his presence at multiple well-heeled courts of the period, this fact would not be particularly surprising. Yet, while he was clearly exposed to, and as Dr. Mirza states, held a certain proficiency in music, does this automatically equate to his having an ability to practice it, let alone augment styles that were already in existence? Could this line simply mean he viewed his poetic works as musical in and of themselves? So, as we'll see, the topic of which, if any, musical realms he impacted or influenced, I mean, it still remains underneath debate, even in the case of this particular assertion that is so widely used as proof within academic writing. So the first topic of debate centers around the development of Tirana, which is probably the least sort of lambasted portions. So in the previous poem, Khusrau posits that musicians need poets to amplify the beauty of their music, that without a lyricist, musicians would utter random, meaningless words. There we go. Tirana allegedly addressed this issue, meaning song in Persian, the style evolved from the Indic practice of Nritya, where musicians would vocalize random words and mnemonic syllables to musical accompaniments. Khusrau contributed to this practice by introducing Persian and Hindi words, particularly ones that were sort of vowel-based rather than hard consonant sound-based. and he would string them together in such a way as to have them make a modicum of sense. So he wasn't creating full sentences out of them. They wouldn't necessarily make sense if you were to read them off in a sentence, but the portions of them would make sense, which was allegedly a new invention. So according to Jayadeva Singh Thakur, after Khusrau's death, this tendency, this meaning in Tarana reverted to the ancient Nirgit practice of just linking syllables together. But this is also challenged by one of Khusrau's sort of more recent and harsher critics, which is a gentleman named Dilip Karnav, who claims that even during Khusrau's time, Tarana was largely meaningless, with most of the phrases claimed to have been introduced by Khusrau having no particular lexical meaning, whether in Persian or in, quote, any Indian language. So some of the phrases that are claimed to have been his handiwork nevertheless can reflect that Khusrau had a belief that musicians needed meaningful lyrics to amplify the beauty of their work. And he did just that in the development of Tarana, if these claims were true. So if we accept that Khusrau did contribute to Tarana, which there seems to be some record of this, which, because as I said, it's a less lambasted claim, it most certainly did spearhead a new sort of Indo-Persian soundscape. While the Indic and Persian traditions coexisted on the subcontinent, Khusrau sort of combined them into one mode of expression, causing them to erupt in one voice where there had previously been two separate ones. So moving on, we know that Khusrau, as Mirza states, again studied the science of music, as he made it abundantly clear through his large tomes of writing. And as mentioned earlier, Khusrau has, as I had mentioned earlier, and it is here, therefore, that I am given pause to question the validity of many of the claims put forth regarding some of Khusrau's musical contributions, just simply because he left so much information. And surely if he had contributed some stunning aspect to the existent soundscape of his day, he would not have hesitated to note it down. He noted down so much, and he certainly wasn't a wallflower, and he wasn't given to false modesty. So it gives me pause to think. That being said, he did leave some works which pertain to music in such volumes such as the Ajazi Khusravi. It's clear that Khusrau was energetically involved in the music production of his day. And through his detailed deconstruction of existent ragas and vivid descriptions of instruments, including references to their history and composition and use and the various practitioners and experts in them, it's really abundantly clear that he had a very solid knowledge of both Persian and Indic styles of music being produced at the court in Dili at that time. At a certain point in this particular volume, Khusrau does place himself into the dialogue as much more than just what I would consider a scientific recorder of information. So he details an instance where he encouraged a competition of sorts to take place between a group of musicians, of Hindustani musical practitioners who had arrived at the court, and he sort of encouraged them to have a competition with the encamped Persianate ones. And in this, after this sort of competition takes place, and at different parts in his treatise as well, he himself didn't seem to explicitly prefer one sound to another. He just as we saw sort of like in the case of the Hindu laws, Khusrau was unique in the sense that he didn't promote Persianate styles as more refined or beautiful or complicated or anything in comparison to the Indic ones. And he praises both for their various unique aspects, as well as heaping large amounts of praise on the experts and practitioners in both sort of camps, so to speak. So nowhere in this, nor in any other text written by Khusrau, though, does he mention his own personal contribution to ragas or qawwali or any other what Nritya refers to as new melodies of the time. So he doesn't claim anything. So claims have been made on his behalf, and they usually find their roots in the Rag Darpan, which was written by Fakir Ullah Saif Khan during the 17th century. The Rag Darpan itself was a translation and commentary on this earlier book that is unfortunately no longer existent, that was written in the 15th century by a band of musicians under the patronage of Raja Man Singh. And this text allegedly contained almost all the airs introduced by Muslim musicians prior to Man Singh's reign. In the Rag Darpan itself, and so presumably in this earlier text as well, it's asserted that Khusrau blended and contributed to the development of multiple ragas by fusing ones that were already in existence. So here is a partial list of that as it was translated by one of, Malik again. And note that nowhere is it claimed that he invented a singular style, but rather he took, again, those pre-existing ragas and fused them together, creating a new unique sound. And perhaps he never claimed ownership in his written works of these new sounds because he didn't view them as his. So in a strict sense of the word, they were not his. They were existent either in the Persianate world or in the Indic one before his time, and he simply fused them together if this later text is accurate, and indeed the text that it was based upon. So I have probably talked a little bit fast looking at my time, so I apologize if I have plowed through things a little bit too quickly, but I have saved the most contentious claim for last year. And we wade into the debate of whether or not Amir Khusrau invented any musical instruments, specifically the sitar or the tabla. So most academics now generally agree that Amir Khusrau of the 13th and 14th century had nothing to do with the invention of the sitar, but that Amir Khusrau was its inventor. So it seems that over the years, there have been numerous curious minds, so I'm following in the line of many curious minds, and they have done some pretty incredible sleuthing and have not only sort of solidly debunked the myth of our Amir Khusrau inventing the sitar, but have come up with an explanation as to why he was ever associated with the instrument to begin with. So in 1834, a gentleman by the name of Captain N. Augustus Willard authored a book called The Treatise on the Music of Hindustan, states that the sitar is a modern instrument and was invented by Amir Khusrau of Delhi. A historian named Alan Miner very rightfully questions what Willard meant by modern here. Surely a man writing in the 19th century would not refer to an instrument invented in the 14th century as modern. That wouldn't make sense. And so it seems reasonable that Willard must have been referring to a different Amir Khusrau entirely. So Miner is not the only one to have followed this lead. Indeed, as early as 1869, scholars believe that Willard was at the very least referring to a Khusrau who lived after the establishment of the Mughal Empire in the 15th century. So here we see a French scholar speaking about how Willard's Amir Khusrau must have been one who had lived after that Mughal Empire being established. So the confusion seemed to have erupted, claims Miner, when the music scholar Tagore embellished Willard's work by appending a statement that Willard hadn't included in the original, stating that it was the Khusrau of the 12th century, which still doesn't make much sense because our Khusrau didn't live in the 12th century. But Minor very fairly states that Tagore was not the only one to take Willard's words to mean our Amir Khusrau of this earlier period. Several other musicians and scholars working after the publication of Willard's work fell into the same confusion. And given how ambiguous Willard's statement was, it's really not surprising. So who was Willard referring to? So drawing on oral sources, as well as some written works, Minor established that Amir Khusrau lived and worked in 18th century Delhi at the court of Emperor Muhammad Shah, and was very likely the brother of Namat Khan, the Sultan's primary court musician at the time. In the chronicles contemporary to Muhammad Shah's court, it is this brother of Namat who is credited with the invention of the introduction of the sitar to Delhi during that period. And it is most likely the Khusrau, that Khusrau to whom Willard was referring to, not the Amir Khusrau of the 14th century in Delhi. So now we are going to look at the claims regarding the invention of the tabla. So this is more widely dismissed, quite out of hand by most academic writers I've found, but their reasons for this dismissal are few and far between. So in most of the work that I've managed to come across and unearth, most simply state there's this myth, he invented the tabla, it's not true. But they don't explain how they came to this conclusion. And so I have done quite a bit of digging to try and unearth what explanations they have for why they can dismiss it. So one explanation as to why the invention of the tabla could not be the work of Khusrau is the fact that this instrument, the tabla, is not one of those mentioned amongst the percussives that were existent at the court of Akbar, some 260 years after Khusrau's death. Now, if he had invented the tabla during the late 13th or 14th centuries, it seems highly likely that it would have appeared amongst the inventory listed by Abul Fazl in the Aini Akhbari. And this omission is all the more glaring when we see that while tabla is not mentioned, the instrument which Khusrau allegedly invented by splitting in two is not only present, but the very first listed amongst the percussive instruments used at the court of Akbar. So it's also worthy to note that just as was the case with the sitar, Khusrau did not mention the tabla in his own writing. This is remarkable, as Rashid Malik stresses in his book, Hazrat Amir Khusrau Ka Ilmi Musiqi, because in those days, poets often used to mention their adventures in their poetry. And in this matter, Hazrat Amir was not behind his peers. And likewise, his silence is an evidence that he had nothing to do with its invention. So while he is speaking in this instance of the invention of the sitar, he also applies the same logic when discussing the tabla in a later part of the same chapter. And he refers back to this particular quote, this particular reference he made to the sitar. So further, if we consult a list of the instruments that Amir Khusrau mentioned in Ijazi Khusrawi, we can see that the same holds true for tabla as it did in the case of sitar. The tabla is omitted from the list of instruments he discusses at considerable length in his own musical treatise. And referring back to that quote, it seems likely that he would have referred to it in his own musical writings, either in this particular volume or in his numerous others that we had mentioned, but he doesn't. So that's a bit of a telling sign. Now, the question is why in this case, when I'm speaking about bridges between worlds, between Persianate and Indic worlds, why is it important to establish the veracity of claims regarding the invention of the tabla and sitar? And it's simply because, as Malik carefully pointed out, popular belief is that these instruments were formed from older pre-existing instruments of the Indian subcontinent. So if Khusrau, however, had invented either of them, it would have been a form of Indo-Persian bridging as expressed through like a physically constructed item, which would have been very exciting. But perhaps I should accept defeat at this point. But as I go forward in my research, hopefully as I get to know, perhaps have Akhil teach me a lot more about musical traditions and production. I was intrigued, and I want to explore the ideas expressed by Dr. S. Sarmadi, that Khusrau dabbled as an amateur in several instruments, and some of them were Persian, and others were Indic. And how might have his interactions with these instruments caused a confluence of styles, or did it happen organically and had absolutely nothing to do with Khusrau, but it was just something that developed in the court that he was part of? And this, of course, is one of those history questions that's likely not answerable. It might never have an answer, but to me, it is really interesting nonetheless. So without that brings me to an end, and I appreciate all of your sticking around for my 45 minutes, and I hope that I didn't stumble too much. It's my first time speaking through a screen like this, so I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That was a really fascinating lecture. I see we have a few questions, so I'm just going to take some time to field them to you. In the meantime, while I'm asking these questions, everybody, if you have anything you'd like to ask as well, or maybe any comments you'd like to send forward, please send them now, so that we don't get them as we're logging off the call later. So the first question comes from Gayatri Devi. So in the quatrain, The Hindu Lass, when Khusrau says, "I saw a Hindu woman," does he mean an Indian woman or a Hindu religion woman? She asks because the word Hind is India in Farsi.
Mm-hmm. So I was in touch with Sharma, who did the translations of these particular poems, and this referred to a woman of Hindustan. So that means I'm assuming then an Indian woman, not necessarily specific to a religious connotation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then this is more of a comment, but Suresh says that he thinks the invention of tabla by Khusrau was disputed by Dr. Aban Mistri. She was actually the first female tabla player,
Oh,
and she was a scholar as well. So she documented some things regarding his time period and whatnot. So that might be a source you might want to look into.
Mystery? What was her first name?
Aban, Aban.
And thank you. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Hunter says he learned a lot from this presentation, so he wants to send his
Thank
thanks.
you, Dr. Hunter.
And there is another question, and it comes from Suresh. So, what insights can you share with us with regard to the claim that khayal music was invented by Khusrau?
I can't speak to that, unfortunately. So this is the vocal techniques that were allegedly developed by Khusrau, yes?
Yeah, khayal is you could say it's a musical genre.
Yeah, so there was an interesting article that was published on that there was a birth celebration of Khosrow in the 1970s, in 1975, and there was an interesting article that was written at that time about Khael,
Hmm.
and a lot of academics actually reference that particular article because it is really detailed, but they usually append it with the fact that unless you are a music practitioner, it's very, very difficult to unpack and understand. And so it's not an area that I've actually looked into as of yet. I want to become a little bit more informed about the style before I start giving my opinions on that.
Hmm.
But I have read articles about it, and I can send that the name of that article if they like.
Yeah, I would also love that. So,
So
yeah, please
just let
send
me
it.
know where to send it.
Yeah, do you can you go on the chat tab maybe?
Um,
And
it
type
is
it out
appearing
there.
on my screen. So do I?
Oh,
Okay.
if
Um,
you it should if you move your cursor to the top of your screen,
okay.
there should be a bar that'll show up. Or you
Okay.
could stop your screen sharing as well, and then it'll show up on the bottom.
Okay. Okay. So okay, I just have to get the name of it as well. So if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, not to worry. I mean, I had a personal question for you myself,
Okay.
or question for you personally rather. Do we know of where Khusro received his musical training?
So yeah, there is quite a lot of information that refers to that. Again, it's the same way that so according to his own writing,
Hmm.
it was the same as his poetic education. So Khusro seemed to be very non traditional, I suppose, in the sense that he didn't go about like sort of structured educational training, but went about it again, as I had said, like quite haphazardly. And a lot of the stuff that he was exposed to at court is where he decided to pick things up. So, like poetry, he didn't get formally trained in it. So, a lot of people would have been formally trained in Persianate styles of poetry, especially. And then in music as well, it seems that he was trained by court musicians that he was exposed to at the time, as well as sort of like in informal gatherings at his grandfather's home in his early years. He was exposed to a lot of musicians then in musical education. But the most that has been said about his expertise is that he was an amateur. So he was by no means like a master at any musical instrument. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I had another one, so I can't read my own writing. Oh, is there any information out there on what maybe musical forms or maybe musicians that Khusro would have encountered, especially in his various journeys from court to court with having different patronage?
Yes, I haven't come across it in the ragas and that. I know that there is a lot written about who he was influenced in, like in Qawwali.
Hmm.
Um, but again, I didn't mention that in this particular lecture simply because there is a lot on Qawwali and I kind of went down the rabbit hole in that sense. I would have to, you feel free to invite me for another lecture on that. I'll have another 45 minutes. And so, yeah, I can absolutely send information about that as well. There are numerous musicians that he mentions himself. So in
Hmm.
the Jazi Khusravi, he mentions a lot of musicians by name, both Persian people as well as Hindustani people. And he, I'm not sure if he ever says that he was trained by them, but his way of speaking about them is with a huge amount of respect and admiration. Um, and he definitely would have lived at the court in Delhi with them. So most of his writings was after he was sort of settled on music, that is when he was settled at the court in Delhi.
Hmm.
So not his early years. I don't know anything about his early years regarding music in like places like, for instance, Multan. I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you mentioned that he mentions a lot of qawwals that he, has been influenced by. I think one of the other genres which is attributed to him creating is qawwali itself as well. So it would be interesting to have another talk um, yeah, with you to explore, maybe the Persian side of things a bit more. Yeah, Suresh sent a comment saying it was really enlightening. Yeah, it was a really lovely talk, Morgan. Thank you so much for taking the time out to share everything that you've learned with us. I think, it's hard again to make any conclusions as to what would have been the case in terms of Amir Khusro, but one thing that we can maybe conclude around is that his syncretism with understanding different traditions from the Indian and Persianate worlds can maybe translate into the time period where we see syncretism occurring in music as well. So looking forward to what else you have to share. I don't know if you had any concluding remarks you wanted to make.
Not myself, no, except for saying thank you very much and just expressing, like, I had a slide up there that was expressing a lot of thanks. I had a lot of help. As I mentioned in my biography, this year is going to be dedicated to learning Urdu as well as Persian. And so myself, to be able to act, there's very little in English, unfortunately, on Khusrau. And so I had a lot of help from professors at UBC as well as personal acquaintances who spent a great deal of time sitting and going through records with me. So I just wanted to take a moment to just say thank you to all of them. And thank you for inviting me and getting to nerd out about something I'm really passionate about. So thank you. And
Of
I've just
course.
shared the name of that article in the chat.
Perfect. Awesome. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Morgan. Again, if all of you want to take another look at this presentation, we'll have it uploaded on our private YouTube playlist tomorrow in the morning. And we have 2 more events left with Sahabhāva. I know it's already coming to an end. It's gone by way too fast, and I don't know what I'm going to do with all this free time on my hands moving forward. But please, stay tuned with us for the next 2 presentations. We have Prajakta Trehan, who will be giving a Kathak recital on Tuesday in the evening. And then on Saturday following that, we have a Bharatanatyam recital by one of our local dancers, Arno Kamalika. Fun fact, she was a founding board of director for ICMSV. So we're very happy to feature her. She teaches at the Mandala Arts Academy. And of course, Prajakta Trehan is the founder and the teacher at the Nrityanjali School of Kathak. So please tune in this Tuesday at 7 p.m. Stay safe, and thank you once again to Morgan for her wonderful presentation. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.